everyone. Stephanie Vizzi coming at you from Baltimore, Maryland today. Gonna give a talk about Hey everyone, Stephanie sorry, I had some other audio in the background. So Ecto Multis, here we go. What is an Ecto Multi? It's a built-in Ecto tool. It deals with database changes. It's a compound data structure, and it works as a single unit. So compound structure, but works as a single unit. Essentially, the function of it is sort of a pass-fail function. So one for all for one. If something fails along the line of the sequence, then everything gets rolled back and it doesn't go through. So that's the cool part. What is the deal with Ecto Multis? A lot of people find them really confusing. A lot of people really love them. They look like this, so that is like crazy and a lot to get into, and really can be a lot for people. So we'll just get into some basics here to start with. When to use them, for example. So essentially, they're used a lot around processes, right? If you have something like creating a new user where you're doing several things at once, this is like prime time for Ecto Multis. You know, you're gonna create a user, give them a role, do some other stuff. You know, put them in a log or send out an email or whatever. If there's a lot of things wrapped around when not to use them, really, if you're not doing any database stuff, since it's a Ecto tool, if you are just doing single one-off transactions, then you really don't need them. And also, if you don't need to roll back anything, if stuff doesn't work out, then you don't need a multi. Just a reminder, like, what would it look like if we didn't have this cool, nice thing wrapped up for us? Pretty much a lot of ifs, cases, withs, and what have yous, you know, like a lot of nested stuff in here, you know, getting into the weeds a little bit. You know, you'd start off with your transaction and then you'd have to like do a lot of conditionals based around rollbacks and whether or not those things went through or not. So instead, you know, we have this multi here, which is like really nice and neat. A lot cleaner, does the same thing as, you know, what we were looking at before, just a little bit easier to read. They can get like pretty crazy though. So we'll just go over some of the sort of overview basics of what they're about. The structure basically is like this. Starts with the Ecto Multi new function, ends with the repo transaction, put a bunch of stuff in the middle. These are your functions here. I tend to think of them in these two categories: database CRUD stuff on the left, and then your non-database helpers and exterior things as well. And so yeah, here's a real life example of what they can look like using one of the non-database functions here, but they can get pretty hairy pretty quickly. So this is really nice and readable and nice, but they can get, you know, full of stuff really easily. So, and this is just one part. So if we look a little bit closer at the database stuff, we can dig into these here. This is kind of like the core in my mind for the multis. So you can see here also there are two categories, subcategories, if you will, like the single and the multiple versions: delete, delete all, insert, insert all. And they have a lot of similar arguments, the first two in particular, but that core third argument, the singles and the multiples tend to follow more of a similar pattern. Again, this is just my thinking. And so we can sort of dig into that in a second. So looking at the arguments. The basic arguments that are going to go into but all of these database functions here are your multi. That's that ecto multi new that kicks things off in the beginning. It's piped down through every section. Your name as well will be a part of all of them. The things to remember is that you can choose any name that you want. Does have to be unique. It does have to be an atom, but you're going to use that name often in later sections. Not necessarily, but so it's nice to have that sort of as a reference there. So just keep that in mind. You can also change that up if you need to via pattern matching. We'll look at that in a little bit. Let's look at these single CRUD ones. As I said, that third argument sort of follows a similar pattern. So we can look at what that might be, which is change set or struct or function. And so we can look at these individually. Change set. So it can be any change set that you already have in your app that you've already set up, which is really nice. You can just pop that right in, put in your struct and your params, and off you are. Struct is sort of similar too. You can just pass the struct right in as long as you are corresponding with the columns there. You can only use this for delete and insert, just a little note, but it is really nice and convenient to just be able to put that in directly. Functions are where things get more interesting, generally used for complex actions. Things that you have created in the database previously in the same multi. So that's that name that's getting passed down through each section. The function takes a little bit of a different syntax setup with its own arguments. So let's have a look at that. So digging in a little deeper here, you can see on the first line, we've got we're using insert here with the function. The function has its own arguments. So those are going to be the names, the map of names that's passed down and the things they've created along the way. Here I'm pattern matching just to pull out the user that I've already created because I want to do something with that. In the next line here, I am using a remote to get some other information from elsewhere in my app, using the ID to get the group, for example, and then using that group variable and then just using a change set like I would have anywhere else. So using a function here so I can use the previously created user, use that user to get something else, and then create a new map of things that I want to put in the database. Multiple. So again, these are the multiple versions. They take a little bit different structure. They're all a little bit different. They're not as cohesive in the argument front as the single ones, but we can dig in, look a little closer here. So yeah, the arguments, the core argument here we'll be looking at is schema or source, or could also be a queryable or a function, and then you might have some values there that you need to pass in as well. So if we're going to do schema, then you can just reference your schema directly that you already have set up in your app. Again, really nice, similar sort of to a struct where it's like already set up, and so you can just pop that right in. In this case here, we're using it with insert all. It's really the only one that you can use it with here. So you're going to have your schema user down in the middle, and then the actual entries that you're going to be passing in to update, or sorry, insert. Entries, here we are. So we're referencing the schema directly again in this example below, putting the records in, and then here's just an example of what the entries might look like if you're going to do a bunch at one time. For delete all and update all, you can use a queryable or a function. So here, you're going to have to get into the database to find the records that you're going to be changing. This is just a raw SQL query. And if you do end up using a function here, it must also return a queryable. So just keep that in mind. got the example, we're just deleting all, and then the second line is just our straight up query in SQL from the database. So that's really nice. Updates, you know, the SQL here we're going to use. So in this example, we're doing update all again here. We're using a function. We've got this current time variable I've created, and then we're just, doing our queryable again right in here. As for the non-database functions, so we'll get into these a little bit, just looking at some of the ones that I use the most, but here's the full list again. They do take a little bit of a different structure and stuff. Some of them are more helper-like in my mind. Some of them allow you to do some exterior things, but we can take a look at the arguments for ones that I use a lot. So our arguments here, well, the ones I'm going to look at are run and merge. There are two different versions of this as well. The longer array versions are the ones where you can just, pull directly from a module and just use that directly in the multi section right there. So that's really nice. Or you can use the shorter version. So here, we're going to be looking at the function part again. If you do decide to use a function, it does take a little bit of a different structure than the ones that the database functions took. So here you have two arguments. You have your repo and changes. That's so that you can make database changes directly in this function here. And you're not relying on the internal multi-function like insert to do that for you. So in the example below, I'm setting up a function. It's not really quite complete here with the patient group name. Got my repo ready to go, and then I'm pattern matching a patient out of previous changes that have come down the line. So we'll take a little bit of a closer look at these two. Run, which I use a lot. It must return a tuple. You can use previously created data that you've created previously in the multi. So the example here, I'm not using repo. I have that underscored. I am pattern matching out that image and then using that image to do something. And then this particular run, I'm explicitly returning a tuple here myself. So here's just a simple example. This one is a little bit different in that I'm not returning the tuple directly myself, but actually using a module function that returns one. So this is the same thing. You just can't see it explicitly in this example, but this happens. This is a pattern that you'll see a lot. Again, not using repo, but pattern matching on the changes in order to pull up that patient to use that patient to fetch some other data. And then here is an example where I'm not using changes. Got that underscored in the first line, but I'm using repo instead. And I'm going to do a get by here and do some database action in this run. So run is like kind of more open-ended than some of the more helper ones. So that's really nice and super useful. Merge is the next one we're going to look at. So this one must return a multi. A lot of times I use it to make use of another multi elsewhere in my app. So something that's standalone that does some functionality on its own somewhere. Now I want to incorporate it into a larger process. So here, I've got an example where I'm just like adding something to an image library. You can see with that function, I only have the changes here. And if I wanted to do something with the condition, just a cool note is that I can, meet some condition and put a new multi in there, or, use a module function that is a multi. If it doesn't meet the condition, I can just return Ecto Multi new, and then it, goes along its merry way. So if we just take a look at that original kind of complicated example, we can break that down a little bit, just sort of a last look after we've, gone into some of these a little bit more. So here's this complicated multi that can be like confusing and hard to look at. But if we break it down piece by piece, you can see that in this first section, I'm using a run. Um, it It's using it's not using repo changes here. I'm just going to fetch some info from a remote somewhere else and passing that information down along the line. Here, I'm just doing some checks to make sure everything is okay, adding in some errors probably in case, that stuff had already been picked up or it's expired. Just going to run some exterior checks here to make sure that everything is good as I move down the line in this process. Here I am doing an update using a function here. I'm renaming that original fetch where we're getting the patient to patient, so it just makes a little bit more sense. And then using a change set to update some stuff in the database. For the next one, I'm using another run and using repo here. In the second line, I'm building my query into a variable that I can just pop in really easily. And then putting in this database change using repo and then update all with that query right in there. So, again, a little bit more complicated why I'm using a run here, but, has a lot of stuff built in, including update all. And then in this last one, I'm sending an email. I'm going to use run again, using the patient from above again, pattern matching that off the changes, and then building a map for the OBON worker to consume, and then sending an email right at the end, and then transactioning the whole thing. If everything goes well, then it gets put through. If something goes wrong along the line, then everything gets rolled back. That's my talk and my info. Have some time for some questions, hopefully. So yeah.